The Galactic Council chamber buzzed with the hum of alien voices, a cacophony of languages unified by the Council's universal translator. Towering figures from dozens of species filled the vast hall, their ornate clothing and bioluminescent adornments shimmering under the soft glow of overhead lights. In stark contrast, a solitary human stood at the center of it all. Ambassador David Kane adjusted his simple gray suit, its understated design a glaring deviation from the ostentatious attire of the alien delegates. His face betrayed no hint of discomfort, though he was keenly aware of the countless pairs of eyes scrutinizing him with thinly veiled disdain. From his elevated podium, Primarch Varric of the Kaarthal Empire leaned forward, his 6 scarlet eyes narrowing in mock amusement. Varric's voice, a guttural growl that reverberated through the chamber, sliced through the general murmurs. And here we have humanity's offering to galactic diplomacy, a species so young they still count their planetary orbits like hatchlings count the days. Laughter rippled through the room, some of it restrained, most of it unabashed. Kane stood his ground, his hands loosely clasped behind his back, his expression neutral. Varric smirked, revealing rows of serrated teeth. Tell me, Ambassador Kane, how does a species with no notable achievements, neither in technology, culture, nor war, dare to demand a seat at this council? Or is this some cosmic joke we've all missed? Kane tilted his head slightly, his lips curling into a faint smile. Primarch Varric, your reputation for eloquence precedes you. Though I must admit, I wasn't aware it also extended to stand-up comedy. A few delegates stifled chuckles, more at Kane's audacity than the joke itself. Varric's glare intensified, but Kane pressed on, his voice calm yet firm. Humanity's presence here is no joke, Primarch. We're not here to boast or intimidate. We're here because we earned our place, not through conquest, but through resilience. The chamber quieted slightly, though skepticism lingered in the air. Varric scoffed, his mandibles clicking in derision. Resilience? A euphemism for incompetence, perhaps. You survived by luck and the charity of stronger species. Without allies, your kind would have been eradicated long ago. Kane's gaze remained steady, his voice unshaken. True, humanity has relied on allies. We've faced near extinction more than once. But each time, we adapted. We endured. And we learned. Isn't survival in the face of overwhelming odds the true measure of strength? The council broke into murmurs, some intrigued, others dismissive. Varric raised a clawed hand to silence them. A fine speech, Ambassador. But words are wind. Show us something more than your ability to string sentences together. Convince us humanity isn't just a liability in this august assembly. The room erupted into laughter, the sound echoing through the chamber like a chorus of disdain. Kane waited, his expression unchanging, until the laughter subsided. Then, with deliberate calm, he leaned forward slightly, his eyes locking onto Varric's. Sometimes, Kane said, his voice dropping just enough to command attention, actions speak louder than words. The enigmatic smile returned to his lips, and for the first time, a ripple of unease passed through the council. Kane straightened, his posture relaxed but his presence now subtly commanding. He turned his gaze to the rest of the assembly, his words carrying a quiet confidence. Humanity doesn't need to convince you with speeches, Primarch. We'll prove our worth the only way we know how, when it matters most. With that, he stepped back, leaving the chamber in a momentary silence. The laughter that had filled the room moments before seemed to linger in the air, now tinged with uncertainty. As the session continued, Kane stood at his station, quietly observing the proceedings. Inwardly, his mind churned. The ridicule didn't bother him, it was expected. What mattered was the seed he'd just planted. It wasn't bravado, it was a promise. In the back of his mind, though, a darker thought stirred. His fingers brushed the faint outline of a small insignia pinned beneath his jacket, out of sight. A relic from a life he'd left behind. He glanced at the towering figures around him and allowed himself a moment of reflection. They saw a diplomat. A talker. A powerless man from a powerless species. And that, Kane thought, was exactly what he wanted them to see. After the council adjourned, Kane lingered in the vast corridors of the assembly hall, his measured steps echoing against the towering walls. The Zenthari ambassador, Shoreen, approached silently. Her graceful, semi-translucent form shimmered faintly, the gentle glow of her empathic aura shifting between shades of concern and curiosity. "You handled the Primarch well," she said, her voice soft yet resonant in his mind. The Zenthari rarely spoke aloud, their telepathic communication more efficient and intimate. Kane offered her a small nod, his diplomatic smile firmly in place. "It's easier to deflect insults when you know they come from a place of insecurity," Kane replied lightly, though his tone carried a hint of weariness. Shoreen's glow flickered for a moment, a sign she sensed the strain he carefully concealed. "Even so," she said, "humanity's position here is fragile. The Council's patience is thin. If you cannot prove your people's value soon, there are already whispers of a vote to revoke your membership." Kane exhaled slowly, his gaze momentarily drifting to the intricate murals etched into the walls, depicting millennia of galactic history. "It seems old habits die hard. Humanity has always been underestimated. But we're used to that." Shoreen tilted her head, studying him intently. Her empathic senses brushed lightly against his thoughts, not enough to intrude but enough to catch fleeting impressions. She froze, her glow dimming slightly as she glimpsed something unexpected, flashes of violence, shadowy memories of battles fought in desolate places, and a deep, abiding weight of loss. "You've seen war," she said softly, her tone no longer that of a diplomat but of someone piecing together a puzzle. Kane's eyes flicked to hers, his expression hardening for a brief moment before his mask of calm returned. "War leaves its mark on everyone," he said evenly. "Even those who don't hold a weapon." Shoreen didn't press further, though the unease lingered between them. Their conversation was interrupted by a chime echoing through the hall, signaling an emergency session. Delegates hurried back into the chamber, murmurs of alarm spreading like wildfire. Kane and Shoreen exchanged a brief glance before joining the others. The council chamber was abuzz with tension as a holographic projection materialized in the center of the room. It displayed a star system consumed by chaos, planets reduced to rubble, massive fleets obliterated, and a dark, writhing mass spreading across the void. "The Raltec swarm," announced a council aide, their voice trembling. "A hive mind species. Their fleets have begun consuming systems on the fringes of council space. The destruction is total. No survivors." The room erupted into chaos. Delegates shouted over one another, their fear palpable. Varric's voice boomed above the noise. "We must strike immediately. Send the full might of the Council fleet to annihilate this threat before it reaches our core systems. And risk provoking the swarm into accelerating its advance," countered a delegate from the Severan Consortium. "A direct attack could lead them straight to us." Kane raised a hand, his voice calm but firm. "Rushing in blindly would be a mistake. The swarm operates as a hive mind, attacking it head-on is like fighting the ocean with a spear. We need to understand their patterns, their weaknesses, and strike where it matters." The council chamber quieted briefly, more out of surprise than agreement. Varric sneered. "Typical human cowardice. Your kind knows nothing of decisive action. This is why you'll never be more than parasites in this council." Kane met Varric's glare without flinching. "Decisive action without preparation isn't bravery, Primarch. It's recklessness. Humanity has faced extinction before, and we survived, not through brute force, but through strategy. You do well to remember that." The tension between them crackled, but before Varric could retort, the session was adjourned, leaving the delegates to prepare for an emergency vote on how to respond to the swarm. Later, in the quiet of his quarters, Kane sat alone. The soft light from a nearby console cast long shadows across the room. From a hidden compartment in his bag, he retrieved a small, weathered box. Inside lay a tarnished military medal, its surface etched with scars of time and conflict. His fingers traced the inscription on the back, the words almost worn away. As he held it, fragmented memories surfaced, moments of fire and chaos, orders shouted over comms, and faces of comrades long gone. Kane's grip tightened around the metal, his jaw set. The man he'd been before, the soldier, the strategist, was a part of him he'd tried to bury. But the galaxy was once again on the brink, and he could feel the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders, just as it had in the past. He closed the box and slipped it back into its hiding place. For now, he was still Ambassador Kane, the calm, unassuming diplomat. But deep down, he knew it wouldn't be long before the Council, and the Swarm, forced him to become something more. The Council reconvened in the aftermath of devastating news. The Raltech Swarm had overrun an outlying sector of Council space, consuming 3 inhabited worlds in a matter of days. The holographic display showed the aftermath: scorched planetary surfaces, fragmented orbital defenses, and no sign of survivors. The room was silent, the weight of the destruction settling over the delegates. Even Varric, known for his bluster, was momentarily subdued. But his silence didn't last. "This is what comes of hesitation," Varric growled, slamming a clawed fist onto his podium. "We should have acted the moment we knew of their approach. Instead, we allowed fear and indecision to weaken us. I will not let this swarm threaten my empire, or any of us, any further." The Council, still reeling from the disaster, quickly approved Varric's proposal to launch a massive coalition fleet against the swarm. Ships from dozens of species were mobilized in record time, each boasting the most advanced technology their civilizations had to offer. Kane stood quietly at the edge of the chamber, watching the Council's desperation unfold. He didn't speak, knowing his words would fall on deaf ears. When the session ended, he found himself alone with Shoreen in a quiet alcove. "They won't listen to you," Shoreen said softly, her empathic aura glowing faintly with sadness. "They don't need to," Kane replied, his tone clipped but resolute. "Not yet." Shoreen's glow shifted to a deeper hue of curiosity as Kane handed her a data chip. "What is this?" "An alternative," Kane said. "A way to fight the swarm without throwing countless lives into the meat grinder." Shoreen inserted the chip into her portable console, and holographic schematics unfolded before her: fleet formations, stealth maneuvers, and advanced countermeasures tailored specifically to the swarm's hive mind behavior. Her normally serene expression flickered with astonishment. This is remarkable," she said, her voice tinged with disbelief. "But how?" Kane met her gaze, his expression unreadable. "Humanity has faced extinction before. We've had to learn how to fight enemies far stronger than us. This isn't our first brush with annihilation." Shoreen studied him for a moment, her empathic senses brushing lightly against his mind. She caught glimpses of something deeper, memories he kept buried, fragments of pain and conflict. But she didn't push. "Will you present this to the Council?" she asked. Kane shook his head. "They'd dismiss it without a second glance. But if you share it with those who'll listen, it might make a difference." Shoreen nodded, tucking the chip away. "And your people? What will they do?" Kane's eyes hardened. "What we've always done. Adapt. Survive. Fight." As the coalition fleet prepared to engage the swarm, humanity quietly mobilized its own forces. The Council had long dismissed humanity's military as inconsequential, an assessment that was about to be proven dangerously wrong. Hidden in the depths of Sol's asteroid belt, humanity's fleet emerged from shadow. Sleek, angular ships equipped with experimental stealth technology and advanced weaponry powered up for their first real deployment. Years of research and development, carried out in secret, had culminated in a fleet designed for asymmetric warfare: small, agile, and devastatingly efficient. Kane stood aboard the Resolute, the flagship of the human fleet. He wasn't in command, his diplomatic role precluded such a position, but his influence was undeniable. Every ship, every strategy bore the mark of his mind, honed through years of survival wars and covert operations. As the fleet made final preparations, Kane retreated to his quarters. There, in the quiet hum of the ship, he allowed himself a moment of reflection. From a drawer, he retrieved a small, worn photograph of a squad of soldiers, himself among them, much younger and clad in combat gear. His fingers brushed over the image, memories rushing back unbidden. He saw himself leading a team through hostile terrain, their objective a desperate mission to disable an enemy superweapon. He remembered the relentless pressure, the impossible odds, and the sacrifices they'd made to succeed. That mission, and countless others, had shaped him into the man he was now, a strategist, a survivor, and, above all, someone who understood the cost of failure. But there was no time to dwell on the past. Kane tucked the photograph away and returned to the bridge, his focus razor-sharp. Meanwhile, Shoreen discreetly shared the schematics with a handful of allies within the council. Some were skeptical, but others, desperate for any advantage, began quietly adjusting their fleet's tactics based on Kane's plan. When the coalition fleet finally engaged the swarm, the results were as disastrous as Kane had predicted. Varick's arrogance and overconfidence led to critical miscalculations, and the swarm overwhelmed the coalition forces with sheer numbers and coordinated ferocity. Ships were torn apart, entire squadrons lost in minutes. Despite the devastation, the Council refused to acknowledge humanity's offer to assist. Varick, bruised but unbowed, dismissed any mention of human involvement. Let the primitives play their games, he snarled when Shoreen suggested reconsidering Kane's plan. They'll only get in the way. Kane, hearing this through indirect channels, allowed himself a grim smile. Let them underestimate us, he thought. They always do. The tension grew as news of the coalition's defeat spread. The swarm was advancing faster than anticipated, and the Council's remaining fleets were in disarray. Humanity's window to act was narrowing, and Kane knew that the moment to reveal their hand was fast approaching. For now, though, he bided his time, watching as the galaxy's greatest powers stumbled against a foe they couldn't comprehend. And in the shadows, humanity prepared to show them what it truly meant to fight for survival. The Galactic sector near the Durrani Nebula was in chaos. The swarm's massive, writhing fleet darkened the stars, its countless vessels moving in eerie unison. The Council's combined fleet, battered from its earlier failures, had been forced to make a desperate stand. Ships from dozens of species hurled everything they had at the relentless foe, but it was clear the battle was slipping away. The swarm adapted with terrifying speed, exploiting every weakness, countering every move. The Council's admirals shouted frantic orders, but their fleets, disorganized and scattered, were picked apart with ruthless efficiency. The Primarch's flagship had already been crippled, and Varick himself was barely holding back panic. In the chaos, a calm, steady voice cut through the fleet-wide comms channel. Council forces, fall back to coordinates 117.3. Establish staggered formations and redirect fire to Grid 4F, repeat, focus fire on Grid 4F. The voice was unmistakable. Ambassador Kane. For a moment, there was stunned silence as Council commanders exchanged confused glances. But the voice carried an authority that was impossible to ignore. Hesitantly at first, then with growing desperation, the scattered ships began adjusting their formations, following the instructions relayed by Kane. And then, from the shadows of the nebula, humanity's fleet emerged. Unlike the sleek, polished vessels of the older species, the human ships were sharp-edged and utilitarian, built for function over form. Their surfaces shimmered faintly, cloaked in advanced stealth technology that had kept them hidden until the perfect moment. With surgical precision, they struck at the swarm's flanks, targeting key nodes in the hive's coordination network. On the Council flagship, Varick's enraged voice roared over the comms. What is the meaning of this? Who authorized the humans to interfere? This isn't interference, Kane replied smoothly. This is survival. Varick sputtered in fury, but the rest of the Council was too shocked to react. Humanity's fleet moved like a single, unified organism, its maneuvers flawless and precise. Each ship seemed to anticipate the swarm's moves before they happened, cutting off escape routes, isolating clusters of enemy vessels, and dismantling them piece by piece. Kane stood aboard the Resolute, no longer the mild-mannered diplomat the Council had known. Dressed in a combat uniform, he exuded a quiet confidence that commanded respect. From his position at the tactical console, he orchestrated the battle with the practiced ease of someone who had been in this position countless times before. Deploy decoy drones, he ordered. Draw their attention away from our flanking units. All stealth wings, converge on the primary hive ship. Take out its shielding, and the rest will follow. The bridge crew worked seamlessly under his command, their trust in Kane absolute. This was what he was born to do, not negotiate, not placate, but lead. The battle raged on, tense and chaotic. Humanity's unconventional tactics turned the tide. Using cloaked ships to strike from unexpected angles, deploying EMP bursts to disrupt the hive's synchronization, and leveraging holographic projections to create false targets, they fought not just with firepower but with ingenuity. Varric, watching from his damaged flagship, couldn't contain his rage. How is this possible? How can a species so primitive, so beneath us, do this? Kane's face appeared on the Council's shared holoscreen, calm and unyielding. Because we've had practice. Varric snarled. Who are you? You're no mere diplomat. For a moment, Kane said nothing, his eyes locked on Varric's. Then he spoke, his voice carrying the weight of old battles and forgotten pain. My name is David Kane. Before I was an ambassador, I was a soldier. A strategist. I led humanity's forces through the survival wars. We were outnumbered, outgunned, and left for dead more times than I can count. But we endured. We adapted. And we won. A murmur rippled through the Council. They had heard whispers of humanity's wars, stories of desperate battles against enemies far stronger than themselves. But the details had been shrouded in secrecy, the true scale of their resilience never revealed, until now. Flashbacks played in Kane's mind as he spoke. He saw himself leading his team through a frozen wasteland, their breaths fogging in the icy air as they evaded enemy patrols. He remembered the thunderous roar of orbital bombardments as his fleet launched a desperate counterattack. He felt again the crushing weight of responsibility as he sent soldiers to their deaths, knowing it was the only way to save millions more. I didn't want to fight again, Kane admitted, his voice softer now. I became a diplomat because I believed in peace. But make no mistake, when survival is on the line, humanity knows how to fight. As he spoke, the battle reached its climax. Humanity's stealth units disabled the swarm's primary hive ship, causing a ripple effect that threw the rest of the fleet into disarray. The Council's surviving forces, emboldened by humanity's success, regrouped and pressed the advantage. The swarm, no longer the unstoppable force it had seemed, began to retreat. On the bridge of the Resolute, Kane allowed himself a moment of quiet satisfaction. The galaxy had seen what humanity was capable of, not just as survivors, but as warriors, strategists, and innovators. Ambassador Kane, Shoreen's voice came over a private channel, her tone filled with awe. You saved us. Kane shook his head. Not yet. The swarm isn't finished. But now they know what they're up against. And so does the Council. As the battle wound down, the realization began to sink in among the delegates. Humanity was no longer the weak link in the chain. Kane had proven that their strength lay not in raw power but in their ability to outthink, outmaneuver, and outlast even the most formidable adversaries. And for the first time, the galaxy saw humanity not as a liability, but as an equal. The swarm broke. Humanity's fleet, guided by Kane's unerring commands, had delivered the final, decisive blow. Targeted strikes at key hive ships had disrupted the swarm's intricate neural network, sowing chaos among their ranks. What once seemed an unstoppable tide now fractured, the remaining ships scattering in disarray. For the first time, the hive mind recoiled, retreating into the void. Across the battlefield, Council ships regrouped under Kane's direction, a coordinated force no longer held back by petty rivalries or fragmented leadership. Together, they pressed the advantage, driving the swarm further into retreat until the final enemy vessel disappeared into the distant stars. A silence fell over the Council fleet, one of relief and awe. Against all odds, they had survived. And it was humanity's strategy, humanity's strength, that had turned the tide. The Council chamber was packed in the aftermath of the battle. Delegates who had once mocked humanity now sat in silence, their arrogance stripped away by the undeniable truth of what they had witnessed. Kane stood at the center of the chamber, his posture calm yet commanding. The murmurs of the gathered delegates ceased as he began to speak. For centuries, Kane said, his voice steady but firm, humanity has been underestimated. Dismissed. Mocked. We were called primitive, fragile, unworthy of standing alongside the great civilizations of this galaxy. He let his gaze sweep the room, meeting the eyes of each delegate in turn. And yet, it was humanity that stood firm when faced with annihilation. It was humanity that turned weakness into strength. It was humanity that saved us all. The chamber was utterly silent. Even Varric, usually so quick with his biting remarks, had nothing to say. Kane's words carried a weight that could not be denied. We did not succeed today because we were the strongest, Kane continued. We succeeded because we adapted. Because we thought beyond what was expected. Because we stood together. His voice softened, the steel in his tone giving way to something more introspective. Survival isn't about being the biggest or the most powerful. It's about resilience. It's about finding a way when there seems to be none. That's what humanity has learned, sometimes the hard way, and that's what we bring to this council. Varric rose, his hulking form casting a shadow over the assembly. For a moment, it seemed he might argue, but instead, he inclined his head, a stiff, reluctant motion that spoke volumes. You've proven your point, Ambassador Kane, he said, his voice low and grudging. Perhaps, we misjudged you. Misjudged your people. It wasn't an apology, not exactly, but it was as close as Varric's pride would allow. And it was enough. The council's vote came swiftly. By unanimous decision, humanity was granted an elevated status within the council. No longer the newest and weakest member, they were now seen as equal partners, and as leaders in both military and diplomatic efforts. When the decision was announced, the chamber erupted in applause. But Kane, standing at the center, showed no trace of triumph. Instead, he raised a hand for silence. I didn't come here to seek recognition, he said. I didn't come here to prove a point or claim glory. I came here because it was my duty, to my people, to this council, to the galaxy we share. And that duty doesn't end with one battle. He paused, his gaze distant for a moment, as if recalling the faces of those who had fought and fallen under his command in the past. Humanity didn't survive by seeking praise or status. We survived because we did what had to be done, no matter the cost. With that, he turned and began to walk away, his footsteps echoing through the chamber. Before he reached the exit, he stopped and looked back, a faint, enigmatic smile on his face. We're not here to lead. We're here to stand with you. Remember that. And then he was gone. Shoreen watched him leave, a mixture of admiration and wonder on her face. In Kane, she saw the embodiment of humanity's spirit, a species that rose from the ashes of their own struggles, undaunted by scorn or ridicule, always finding a way to prevail. As the council chamber slowly emptied, Shoreen remained, lost in thought. Kane's words echoed in her mind, their simplicity hiding a profound truth. In the end, she murmured, it was the one they mocked who saved them all. And with that, humanity's legacy within the council, and the galaxy, was sealed, not as the weakest or the least, but as a force to be reckoned with. A species that turned every disadvantage into a strength, every challenge into an opportunity, and every doubt into vindication.